Right now, I have the pleasure of interviewing two very special guests who are even have impacted myself as well. So, without further ado, I'll let Percy and Jesse introduce themselves and what they do. So, if you guys just want to go ahead and unmute, then we can start this interview.
Okay, I guess I'll start. So hi, my name is Percy Gresham. I am currently a senior here at UAB in psychology, and I have been working for housing for 4 years. I'm now an RA for Blazer Hall, but previous to that, I was a peer wellness ambassador.
All right, Jesse, if you want to take it away.
All right, I was having some problems with the mute button there. Hey everyone, my name is Jesse Muñoz. Just like Percy, I am also an RA in Blazer Hall. I am a junior majoring in medical sociology, pursuing a pre-med track, and I'm really excited to be here.
All right, well, I'm so glad to even have you guys here. Thank you so much for donating your time. I'll go ahead and get started with some questions, and you guys can take it however you guys want and switch off if you'd like.
Sounds good.
All right, so first I'm gonna ask, so distance covers a lot of topics relating to the pandemic, especially how it has impacted people, whether that's the mental health, suicidal thoughts, loneliness. How would you think that has affected UAB as a school, and what actions are being taken and that can help prevent these?
Oh, that's a great question. Before I answer that, I want to, I guess, present the context from which I'm answering that, which is that I was hired as an RA the week before we got sent home for COVID. And so I will say that that time was very different than it is now, with very different struggles. I think the struggles that I saw then, with all of us being home, was a lot of people were struggling with some of the things that we saw in the film: food insecurity, not being able to get resources, feeling isolated because they were, now far away from their friends, maybe. And a lot of people struggling to relearn how to live with their family. At the time, I was working with upperclassmen in Blunt Hall, so these were students that were sophomore and above. And so, they hadn't lived with their family in a while. And that was kind of the struggle early on in the pandemic. And I think Jesse can speak to kind of the ongoing struggles.
Yeah, absolutely. I will definitely back you up on that. In those feelings of isolation, definitely in the beginning, like the first few months. Just for context, I was hired as an RA in the newest residence hall, McMahon, before the pandemic. And we were expected to be able to open McMahon a year before it did, but because of COVID and everything that had happened, it was delayed. And I only started being a full RA in Blazer January of this year. And that was after a whole semester of having to do online classes and having to do that hybrid structure that we saw at first. And what I can say that I definitely saw that first semester of actually having residents and interacting with people in the residence hall was that it was very difficult to foster a sense of community and interaction between residents during a year where everything was set up to be on Zoom. This academic year, it's looking a little bit more positive, and it's easier to get residents programs and that sort of thing and be able to socialize a little bit than they did in the past. But I definitely, from my perspective, did see a really interesting shift in the way that we socialized as a resident.
All right, those were great answers, and I think you definitely got to the point where how it's just so different, especially coming into an RA expecting to possibly open another hall, and then that doesn't happen. Um, so do you think that the film had an accurate portrayal of mental health during the pandemic, or would you say there's some areas it didn't cover, or some that were over exaggerated, or is there anything you think that you've seen that is portrayed in this film?
I think I'll speak to something that Jesse and I were talking about this film earlier, which is that it does have a limited perspective. I think that the topics that it covers some of them were very universal, but at the same time, it is limited to sort of this more suburban context and this older context. Like there were no college students in this film. And so I think it's limited by that perspective because I think a lot of our college students were going through things similar to what the high schooler was going through, but on a different level because when school got canceled, it wasn't just, oh, I'm home for another week. For a lot of people, it was, I now have to find a flight to get back to wherever I live. Or I now have to drive X hours to get back to where I live. And that was where I was at. I had to drive 2 hours home. And then on top of that, because a lot of us left for spring break and then didn't get to come back, a lot of people didn't get to move out. I was one of the few that did because my stuff was packed from where I had moved buildings. But I think it is kind of limited to that perspective.
Yeah, I can definitely echo those sentiments. I do think that as a film, it does do a good job of capturing sort of the dread and sense of hopelessness that I could see a lot in the news and then a lot of people that I knew at the beginning of the pandemic for sure. But I do definitely agree with Percy that it's very, everyone's experience is their own unique experience. And during the pandemic, when you have to deal with things such as a lower socioeconomic status, that may end up being even greater stressor than the pandemic itself. And I think that's where this film, even though it did a good job of capturing like this scope of that dread, we also have to remember that for some people, they experience that differently than others, for sure.
Of course, yeah, I think it's really awesome that you guys pointed out that well, everyone experiences everything differently, and it did focus on more of the family orientated work life. And as college students, I think it is important to also consider that, like Percy mentioned, that some people just, of course, they felt stranded. There's so many different things that people have experienced, uh, and how they experience it. So it's really interesting that you guys mentioned that. And I think that is very important to mention as well. So I guess I'll jump to the next question as well. So it's more focusing on your current position as RAs. What advice or support can you give regarding the topics addressed in the film, but also outside of that? What resources do we have at UAB that if someone feels like they're going through something right now, that they have somewhere to go?
I think my
Yeah.
biggest piece of advice. Oh, I'm sorry, Jesse. Do you want to go first?
No, please go ahead. Go ahead.
I think my biggest piece of advice is reach out. And from like the professional perspective of an RA, but also from the personal perspective of my experiences, I know that is so much easier said than done. But I also know that once you get through that hard step of reaching out, things get so much easier. I mean, so I have several residents that are in this right now. So of course, like I always want to present myself and other RAs as a resource, because if you're an on-campus student, like that is what we are here to be, as a resource. And I don't think any of us would ever turn our backs on an off-campus student who says like, hey, I know I don't really know you, but I need some help. Like we are here to help. And I think I'll speak to Gareth a little bit right now. Dr. Jones, who's the professor for this class, professors can also be a great resource. If you have a good relationship with a professor and you feel like you are struggling in their class or you just feel like you're struggling, it can sometimes be a good idea to reach out to professors, because they can also be a resource and provide you resources as well.
No, I definitely agree with all of that. So the first step is to take that leap of faith and reach out. But the first step is always identifying who you can reach out to. And if you do live on campus and you live in a residence hall, your RA is the first person that you should be thinking about doing, because all of us are very, not administer care, but be able to direct you in the direction of people that can help you and all the resources that are on campus, like specific to your needs. We know all about student outreach. We know all about student health and wellness and the counseling services that they provide. We know that in student outreach, the Blazer Kitchen is in student outreach, and you can access that if you go to the Hill. We know all about the resources that are available on campus, but obviously the first step is to reach out. And like Percy said, your professor is a good resource for sure, but that is probably the best advice that we can give. Just make that first step.
All right. Yeah, I definitely want to just obviously you guys are more knowledgeable about this, but also this is how I met Jesse myself. I got out and I asked for help and I just had someone to confide in. It doesn't have to be something that is super, super heavy or super, super just like it seems to you. It's just important to go to someone and ask for help or not even just ask for help, go to someone and talk to someone about anything. So I think it's really important that they touch on that. And it's really important that we have RAs to interview right now. And just know there's always someone there to help you. So I think I just want to remind everyone who's listening to this right now is right above this is going to be a Q&A section that you guys can ask questions and write them down in, and I'll direct them towards everyone. But just make sure you guys go in there and write some questions while I'm wrapping this last question up that I have myself. So you guys mentioned that you're upperclassmen, and you may have come into college with a sense of normalcy from the beginning of the pandemic that we didn't really, maybe it was a little more normal than it is now. So, what advice or outlook would you tell us underclassmen to hold with this unusual first step into college?
So I can definitely speak towards this because I noticed a very interesting shift in students' drive to socialize this semester when compared to last. In the first few days of the semester, I saw, my own resident um, gathering in our common area over to chat and to like meet people and to make friends. And it's something that I honestly didn't really see much of all of last year. And it's really awesome to see because definitely before the pandemic, there was a lot more um, avenues that students could take to socialize, whether that be in the commons, that was a lot more open. It was different than it was now. The Hill was also much different than it is now. And the Den, especially, also in local places on campus that were just sort of like hubs of socialization for students, and they all have like changed dramatically with masks and everything. So I definitely would encourage all like freshmen and sophomores now to just really, really try to get out there and find out if there's a club or an organization that you would like to join, something you're passionate about. Definitely, highly recommend you reach out to other people and try to get to know more people than you do.
Yeah, I wanna echo what Jesse is saying about like it is very important to come out and find your community. I as a senior had like a full year of my full freshman year of like everything was normal, and then COVID hit in the second semester of my sophomore year. Um and kind of to me like one of the biggest losses on campus was that sense of community. Um we lost a lot of clubs to the pandemic, which I'm finding out more and more this semester as well. Um, and that definitely made it harder for students now to find where they fit in and find a community that was there to support them. So I just want to echo that, it can be difficult to find your community, but once you do, it's so worth it. It genuinely is so wonderful and so worth it. And like as somebody who is so socially awkward sometimes, I know that that's also easier said than done and also pretty scary sometimes. But I yeah, I just really want to echo what Jesse is saying about like the importance of social support and finding where you fit in.
All right, thank you guys so much. So I'm going to go ahead and get into some of the Q&A questions I had dropped in the section. So Craig asks, how often do residents come to you for help dealing with the effects of the pandemic?
I will say last year it was a lot. It was nearly constant. It was nearly constant. This year it's been a little bit calmer. There have been a couple of things that have come up with vaccination status, with travel plans, but it is not to the volume that I experienced last year of like it is just constant. Um, I think that a lot of people are slowly learning how to cope with our new reality, and I think that has helped a little bit.
Yeah, I can definitely agree with that. Um, Most of it is honestly things to do with masks that we mostly deal with in housing, issues pertaining to that. Um, but for the most part, I really haven't experienced a lot of residents coming to me about concerns with COVID. If I'm being completely honest, the only thing that I can think of is I made sure, at least for my residents, I can't speak for the rest of the residence hall, but at least for my residents during like our roommate agreements, I made sure that they all knew like where they could get vaccinated if they could, and those sorts of things. And we had those sort of conversations, and I sort of wanted to empower them to feel free to have those conversations amongst themselves, like if they're traveling or if some person has like a grandparent who's susceptible and those sorts of things. But honestly, it's been very minimal for sure.
All right, so I'd also like to know, and Craig says the same thing, is people who have anxiety or maybe fear to come up and ask you guys for help, how can they possibly overcome that? Or maybe can you guys reiterate how you're a safe space and how you shouldn't be afraid to come up and talk to you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I will be perfectly honest and say that I'm one of the busier RAs. I'm currently applying for my PhD, and that takes up a lot of my time. And then on top of that, I'm working in a research lab. And so I think from the outside, like you see me and I'm busy and you don't want to be a bother, but I'm always going to make time for you. It may not be right then in that moment, but I will always make time for you. And, and that's something that they teach us when we take this job too, is if you are in a situation and a resident wants to express a concern, but you're not able to handle that concern right then and there, make time for them. And make a specific time. So like if you come up to me and you're like, hey, I need to talk to you about something and I can't do it right then there in that moment because I'm like on my way to class and almost late as I usually am, I'm going to say, okay, I want to hear what you have to say. I want to talk to you. Does this time later today work for you? And if not, what does work for you? And we're always going to find a way to make time for you.
Yeah, absolutely. I always try to remind my residents that I'm always like ready and willing to talk to them about whatever it is they need to talk about. And if not, like if they come knocking on my door and I'm just not there, I always make sure that they have a way to contact me directly if they need anything. So we have a pretty good understanding between like RAs and residents, how open they are and how approachable they are. So um, I definitely think that it's important to know that if you are living in a residence hall and you're going through something, your RA is your resource and is there to help you. We're not just rule enforcers, we're there for you.
All right, and I think this will be our final question just to wrap up this section. Um, do you feel that yourselves or the students or people around you still care about that pandemic for the pandemic? And is it an annoyance at worst? Is what the question asks.
Oh,
That's tough.
that is tough. I think I will say from my experience with this current staff, we take it very seriously. Oh, okay. I'm gonna let Jesse finish answering this question. I'm so sorry. I'm on call right now, and I have a I set it up so that they would text me instead of calling the on-call phone and terrifying everyone. But I need to go handle a situation.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank y'all so much for having me.
Can you please repeat the question? Sorry.
Of course, yeah. You also take a look at it. It's in the Q&A right above this voice chat, but it's basically asking, do you feel like yourselves and the people or students around you care about the pandemic anymore? Or has this pandemic just become an annoyance at worst?
That's really interesting, um, because I definitely agree with what Percy was saying before they left. We do take it really seriously on staff. See people walking into the residence hall and they're not wearing a mask properly. We'll like remind them to please wear a mask and all that. And we make an effort to enforce that rule. But I do see the perception and the attitudes of residents towards being reminded to wear a mask and being reminded to follow in accordance with the guidelines that have been put in place by UAB, and a lot of frustrations and venting that is expressed about that. So I can definitely tell that for residents it may seem like an annoyance for sure, but honestly, in terms of RAs, we're just trying to do our job. Enforce a rule that we didn't write, but it's still our job to enforce, and that's really what it just comes down to. I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, no, I think so. I definitely see how some people might be frustrated with like how long the pandemic has been going on, but I really do appreciate how the RAs and so many people have been prioritizing the safety and health of the students. So, all right. So that is wrapping up our questions and Q&A there. I just want to say thank you so much for coming out, Jesse, and of course, Percy as well. They aren't here right now. We're so thankful. And if you have any resources you're aware of that you'd like to put in the general chat, just so people can know where to reach out and also where they could find you if they need help or they want to reach out to you. So thank you so much. And we're going to go ahead and get transitioned to our next film, which is also named Distance. So we have a bit of a 180 as far as genres go, but a full 360 with names. Distance, the music video, is by the son of the late, great Eddie Van Halen. He released this song last year after the death of his father, but wrote it several years prior when he noticed his father declining health and imagined life without him. So we'll go ahead and get transitioned straight into that.